Narrator, art historian, critic. Look at this face. A knowing, seductive smile playing on the lips. A finger pointing upwards, towards a mystery. An unsettling beauty that is neither entirely male nor entirely female. This is one of the last paintings by Leonardo da Vinci. It's a work of supreme confidence, technical perfection, and profound strangeness. It is, in many ways, a self-portrait not of his face, but of his soul, enigmatic, secretive, and deliberately challenging to the world's conventions. We have all been sold a story about Leonardo. We know the legend of the universal man, the serene sage of the Renaissance, the painter of the Mona Lisa's smile, and the divine architect of the Last Supper. He is the visionary who dreamt of flight and saw the inner workings of the human body, a figure so brilliant he seems to stand apart from the messy business of being human. He is a brand, a myth, a titan whose genius feels almost holy. But that story is a masterpiece of public relations, a 500-year-old lie. What if I told you that the real Leonardo was a man forged in shame, stalked by fear, and plagued by failure? A man whose private life was so scandalous, so dangerous, that he buried it in code, and whose professional life was a graveyard of colossal ambitions and spectacular collapses. The story we've been told is the finished, polished painting. Today we're going to look at the chaotic, dirty, and dangerous underpainting. We are going to uncover the dark side of Leonardo da Vinci, the life he fought so desperately to hide, the secrets he would never, ever want us to know. Welcome to Cogitart. If you believe that history isn't a neat collection of facts but a tangled, passionate, and often brutal human story, then you have found your home. To join us on this quest for the truth that lies in the shadows of art, do something for us right now. Subscribe to the Cogitart channel, give this video a thumbs up to help us reach more people, and please, share it with anyone who loves a story that history books are too polite to tell. Your support is the lifeblood that allows us to do this work. Our journey into Leonardo's darkness begins not in a grand palace, but with a single defining word: bastard. Leonardo was born in 1452 in the Tuscan countryside, the illegitimate son of a respectable notary, Ser Piero da Vinci, and a peasant girl, a local teenager named Caterina. In our modern world, this might seem like a minor detail, but in Renaissance Italy, it was a brand on the soul. Illegitimacy was a legal and social cage. It slammed shut the doors to the most respected and lucrative professions. He could never join the powerful guild of judges and notaries like his father and grandfather. He was barred from attending a university to study the classics, law, or medicine. He was, from the moment he drew his first breath, an outsider, a second-class citizen in a society obsessed with lineage and status. This initial wound, this public mark of shame, became the engine of his life. It lit a fire in his belly, a ferocious, all-consuming ambition to prove that his worth lay not in his bloodline, but in the sheer, undeniable force of his God-given mind. Every breathtaking drawing, every intricate design, every revolutionary brushstroke was a defiant roar against the world that had tried to define him. I may be illegitimate, but I am a genius, and you will remember my name when all the legitimate sons of Florence are dust. This relentless drive for recognition, born from shame, would propel him to unimaginable heights, but it would also lead him to his first great public catastrophe. As a young man of extraordinary talent and, by all accounts, startling physical beauty, he was apprenticed to the Florentine master Andrea del Verrocchio. Florence was the crucible of the Renaissance, a city exploding with artistic innovation, intellectual curiosity, and vast sums of money from patrons like the Medici family. It was a city that celebrated genius, but Florence had a dark underbelly. It was a city of spies, of anonymous accusations, and of a deeply hypocritical moral code. And it was here, in 1476, when Leonardo was 24, that his world almost came to a fiery end. A slip of paper, an anonymous poison pen letter, was dropped into the tamburo, a wooden lockbox outside the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of government, designed for exactly this purpose: secret denunciations. This note accused Leonardo da Vinci and 3 other young men, one of whom was from a very powerful family, of the crime of sodomy with a well-known 17-year-old artist's model and male prostitute named Jacopo Saltarelli. Let's be brutally direct about what this meant, in a way that sanitized documentaries often are not. The charge was not some minor immoral act. In the laws of Florence, sodomy was a capital crime. The prescribed punishment was public execution by being burned at the stake. This was not a slap on the wrist. It was a potential death sentence. Now, Florence had a reputation. The city's homosexual subculture was so vibrant and well known throughout Europe that the common German slang for a sodomite was a Florenzer. The authorities, specifically a group of magistrates known as the Officers of the Night, often turned a blind eye, but periodically they would crack down with brutal severity to make an example and remind everyone of the law. Leonardo, the brilliant young artist, was arrested. His name and the charge were made public. Imagine the sheer terror. This ambitious young man, already wrestling with the stigma of his birth, was now publicly branded a sexual deviant and a criminal facing a horrific death. The shame must have been unbearable. The case proceeded. The charges were ultimately thrown out on 2 occasions, officially due to a lack of a corroborating witness, though it's almost certain that the influence of the powerful Tornabuoni family, to which one of the other accused belonged, was the real reason for the dismissal. But the damage was done. The accusation would cling to him like a shadow for the rest of his life. This event is the first great point of tension in Leonardo's story. The traumatic moment his carefully constructed world of genius and ambition came within a hair's breadth of being incinerated. He learned a cold, hard lesson. His talent was not a shield. The world's judgment could still destroy him. From this point forward, a profound and almost paranoid caution becomes his guiding principle. It is no coincidence that after this public shaming, his famous mirror writing in his private notebooks becomes more systematic. He was a man with a secret to protect, a vulnerability that could be used as a weapon against him at any time. We know he was a strikingly handsome man. The historian Giorgio Vasari tells us he possessed great personal beauty and grace and was very charming. We know he never married. We know he had no known female lovers or children. For his entire adult life, his household, his intimate circle, consisted of a succession of handsome young male pupils and assistants. He was a homosexual man, living in a world where that identity, if proven, meant ruin and death. He learned to sublimate his passions, to pour his desires not into conventional family life, but into his work, his science, and into the young men who formed his strange surrogate family. We will come back to the 2 most important of these young men, the little devil Salai and the noble Francesco Melzi, and the turbulent emotional world they inhabited. But first, we must confront the other great darkness in Leonardo's life, the one that drove his patrons to despair and fundamentally challenges our myth of his perfection, the fact that Leonardo da Vinci, for all his genius, was a master of failure. We imagine Leonardo as the ultimate achiever, a man who succeeded at everything he touched. The historical record screams otherwise. It reveals a man so crippled by perfectionism, so easily distracted by the next shiny intellectual puzzle, that he left a trail of glorious wreckage and broken promises across Italy. His contemporaries did not see the divine figure we revere. They saw a man who was brilliant, yes, but also maddeningly, infuriatingly unreliable. He was notorious for taking on a grand commission, accepting the advance payment, producing a flurry of drawings that were more brilliant than anything anyone had ever seen, and then he'd wander off. He'd get obsessed with the fluid dynamics of a river, the optics of the human eye, or the mathematical beauty of a geometric shape. The painting, the sculpture, the thing he was actually being paid to do, would be left to gather dust. His first major commission in Florence, the Adoration of the Magi, begun in 1481 for a local monastery, is the quintessential example. Look at the preparatory underpainting. It is a work of explosive revolutionary genius. He shatters the calm, orderly, processional compositions of his contemporaries. Instead, he creates a swirling vortex of raw human emotion, a maelstrom of figures reeling in astonishment and awe around the serene figures of the Virgin and Child. It is breathtaking, and it remains a ghost. He never finished it. After a year of work, he simply packed his bags and abandoned it, leaving the monks with a magnificent but useless brown and white panel. He had a better offer. He moved to Milan to work for the city's ruthless and ambitious ruler, Duke Ludovico Sforza. He presented himself not primarily as a painter, but as a military engineer, a designer of bridges, cannons, armored vehicles, and siege weapons. His great task, the project that was to be the monument to the Sforza dynasty, and the crowning achievement of his career, was the creation of the largest equestrian statue the world had ever seen, a bronze monument to Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza, that would stand over 23 feet tall. For 17 years, think about that, almost 2 decades of his prime, Leonardo toiled on this single project. He filled notebook after notebook with some of the most beautiful anatomical studies of horses ever created, dissecting them to understand every muscle, tendon, and bone. He solved immense logistical and engineering problems. Finally, he succeeded in building a colossal clay model of the horse, known as the Gran Cavallo. It was a wonder of the age. People came from all over Italy to gaze at it in awe. The next step was the casting, a process that required some 70 tons of bronze. But Leonardo, ever the obsessive innovator, had devised a new, incredibly risky single-pour casting method that he couldn't quite bring himself to attempt. He hesitated. He tinkered. He delayed, and then his time ran out. In 1499, the French army invaded Milan, and the Sforza Duke was overthrown. The bronze that had been set aside for the statue was melted down to make cannons. As a final, brutal insult, the French soldiers used Leonardo's magnificent clay horse for crossbow practice, shooting at it for sport until the 17th century. Masterpiece crumbled into a pathetic, rain-sodden heap of mud and straw. His life's work, destroyed by his own procrastination and the winds of war. It was his most public, most humiliating, most colossal failure. But the ghost of another failure, perhaps an even more poignant one, still lingers on the walls of the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence. In 1503, the city fathers of Florence, in a stroke of genius, commissioned 2 massive frescoes for their great council hall. The paintings would depict 2 famous Florentine military victories and would face each other in an epic artistic duel. On one wall, they commissioned the fiery, brilliant young sculptor Michelangelo to paint the Battle of Cassina. On the opposing wall, they commissioned the now legendary Leonardo, who had returned to his hometown, to paint the Battle of Anghiari. This was the ultimate artistic showdown, a clash of titans that had the entire city buzzing. Leonardo, true to form, threw himself into the work. His design, which we know today only through copies made by later artists like Peter Paul Rubens, was a vision of terrifying genius. He ignored the grand panoramic sweep of the battle, and instead focused on its savage heart, a furious, writhing knot of men and horses locked in a life-or-death struggle, a vision he famously described as the most beastly madness. This should have been his magnum opus, the work that would silence all critics and secure his legacy. But once again, his fatal flaw, his obsession with technical experimentation, was his undoing. Instead of using the time-tested, reliable technique of true fresco, which involves painting quickly on wet plaster, Leonardo decided to try and revive a lost ancient Roman method called encaustic painting, which used pigments mixed with hot wax. He constructed a massive, complex scaffold, began to paint his masterpiece directly onto the wall, and then brought in large charcoal braziers to try and heat the wall and set the waxy paints. It was an unmitigated disaster. The heat from the braziers was uneven and insufficient. The colors at the top of the massive painting began to set, but the colors at the bottom, closer to the heat source, began to melt. His glorious composition, his vision of beastly madness, began to drip and run down the wall, dissolving into an indecipherable, sticky, ugly mess. Vasari tells us that Leonardo, utterly defeated and humiliated, abandoned the project in disgust. He had failed again, this time in the most public way imaginable. In a head-to-head competition with his bitter younger rival, Michelangelo, that wall was eventually whitewashed and painted over by Vasari himself. The ghost of Leonardo's lost masterpiece may still be hidden there, a testament to a genius so profound it managed to destroy its own greatest creation. This is the central challenge for us when we look at Leonardo. Can we reconcile the popular myth of the flawless genius with this historical reality of a man who was, in many respects, a professional catastrophe? Before we delve even deeper into the truly morbid and obsessive corners of Leonardo's mind, let me quickly ask you again to support what we do here at Cogitart. If this journey into the real Leonardo is giving you a new perspective, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It truly makes a world of difference and helps ensure we can keep digging up the stories that matter. Now, back to the darkness. This dark side wasn't just about professional setbacks. It was intensely personal, and it led him into the realm of the dead. Leonardo's scientific curiosity was a ravenous beast, and it had a particularly morbid appetite, human anatomy. We rightly praise him today for his astonishingly accurate and beautiful anatomical drawings, which were centuries ahead of their time. But we have a tendency to sanitize the grim reality of how he produced them. To understand the machine of the human body, Leonardo knew he had to take it apart. In an age with no refrigeration, under the constant shadow of condemnation from the church for desecrating God's temple, Leonardo spent countless nights, probably in the cellars of hospitals or in secret workshops, surrounded by the overwhelming stench of death and decay. He personally dissected more than 30 human corpses, men, women, an old man to see the cause of a sweet death, and even a pregnant woman from whose body he produced the first accurate and incredibly tender drawing of a fetus in the womb. Just try to imagine the sheer iron will this required. This was not the clean, sterile, academic exercise it is today. It was a gruesome, foul-smelling, and legally perilous business. He describes in his notebooks, with a chillingly detached scientific prose, the process of slicing through muscle, sawing through bone, and meticulously tracing the intricate web of nerves and blood vessels in rotting flesh. He wasn't just mapping the body, he was searching for the physical location of the soul, the mechanical source of life itself. He wrote with a hint of professional pride, "And you who say that it is better to watch an anatomical demonstration than to see these drawings, you would be right if it were possible to observe all the details shown in these drawings in a single figure in which, with all your ability, you will not see nor acquire a knowledge of more than a few vessels, while I, in order to obtain a true and perfect knowledge of these, have dissected more than 10 human bodies." There is an unnerving coldness here, a ruthless dedication to knowledge that steamrolls over all conventional human squeamishness and religious taboos. He was a man who would literally peel the skin from a human face, layer by layer, to better understand how a smile is formed, reducing the very source of the Mona Lisa's magic to a cold system of muscles and nerves. He was walking a razor's edge between brilliant scientific inquiry and a ghoulish obsession, a line that his contemporaries would have seen as deeply transgressive, even unholy. This brings us, finally, to the ultimate black box: Leonardo's private life, his home, his heart. If the sodomy accusation taught him to build a fortress around his public self, his household was the private kingdom where his true nature could be glimpsed, and for over a quarter of a century, that kingdom was dominated by one of the most enigmatic and frustrating figures in all of art history, a boy he nicknamed Salai. Gian Giacomo Caprotti, called Salai, or the Little Devil, entered Leonardo's Milan workshop around 1490. At the age of 10, by all accounts, he was exquisitely beautiful, with a cascade of dark curly hair. Leonardo was instantly and completely captivated, but Salai was no angel. He was, as his nickname suggests, a little monster. He was a pathological liar, a chronic thief, and an incorrigible brat. In his private notebooks, Leonardo keeps a running tally of Salai's transgressions with the exasperated air of a long-suffering parent. On the second day, I had 2 shirts cut for him, a pair of hose, and a doublet, and when I put aside the money to pay for these things, he stole the money from the wallet, and I could never make him confess, though I was quite certain of it. He calls him thief, liar, obstinate, glutton, and yet, for more than 25 years, the great Leonardo da Vinci kept this beautiful, infuriating little devil constantly by his side. We have to be direct and realistic here. It is almost inconceivable that their long, intense relationship was purely platonic. Salai was a boy, and then a young man, who slept in Leonardo's quarters, was dressed in the finest clothes money could buy, velvet, silks, and brocades, and was treated with an indulgence that baffled observers. He was a mediocre painter at best, yet Leonardo allowed him to produce and sell clumsy copies of his own masterpieces. This beautiful, frustrating, and deeply flawed young man was the object of Leonardo's enduring obsession, very likely his greatest and most tumultuous love. He was the chaotic human reality behind the detached scientific genius. Leonardo's drawings of Salai are intimate and sensual, and it's almost certain that Salai was the model for some of Leonardo's most charged, androgynous, and sexually ambiguous figures, including the sly, seductive St. John the Baptist and the equally unsettling Bacchus. Salai was his muse, his torment, his companion, and the living embodiment of the beautiful, dangerous secret he had to hide from the world. In stark and telling contrast was Francesco Melzi, a young nobleman from a respected Milanese family who joined Leonardo's household much later in life, around 1506. Melzi was everything Salai was not. He was loyal, diligent, intelligent, and noble of character. He became Leonardo's true pupil, his surrogate son, and the devoted acolyte who would painstakingly organize the chaotic mountain of his notebooks after his death, preserving them for posterity. The dynamic in Leonardo's final years must have been extraordinary. The aging master, caught between the fiery, untrustworthy, but beloved beauty of Salai and the calm, respectful, dutiful devotion of Melzi. It was in this strange, all-male, makeshift family that Leonardo lived out his final years, first in Rome and then in France, as the honored guest of King Francis III. And the final chapter is written in his will. It was to Melzi, the good son, that he left his most precious legacy, his paintings, his drawings, and his priceless scientific manuscripts. Salai, the little devil who had been his companion for a quarter of a century, received a surprisingly generous inheritance, including half of a vineyard and the house he had lived in. But the true inheritance, the intellectual and artistic soul of Leonardo, was entrusted to the loyal one, not the troublesome one. This all leads us to the final layer of Leonardo's darkness, his profound and lifelong secrecy, epitomized by his famous mirror script. For centuries, people speculated that he was hiding heretical scientific theories from the Inquisition, or protecting his visionary inventions from industrial spies. The truth is likely a mixture of the practical and the paranoid. As a natural left-hander, it was physically easier and less messy for him to write from right to left, but given the searing trauma of the 1476 sodomy accusation, the clear illegality of his anatomical research, and the deeply unconventional nature of his private household, it is impossible to believe that a deep-seated need for secrecy wasn't a powerful motivator. His notebooks were his refuge, a fortress of the mind written in a personal code. Within their pages, he could safely explore ideas about the true age of the earth being far older than the Bible claimed, about the mechanics of the human heart, about the nature of the cosmos, that were profoundly at odds with the rigid dogma of the Catholic Church. He was a man who prized direct empirical observation above all else. A true scientist in an age of unquestioning faith. He was hiding in plain sight, his mind a locked room to which only he held the key. He was building a wall of script between himself and a world that had judged him, shamed him, and threatened to destroy him. So where does this leave us? Are we with the serene, divine genius who painted the Mona Lisa? Or are we with the shamed, paranoid, unreliable, and obsessive man who left a trail of failures and secrets in his wake? The crucial point, the one that makes Leonardo so endlessly fascinating, is that he was both. You cannot separate them. The darkness is not an asterisk to the genius. It is the soil in which the genius grew. His illegitimacy fueled his insatiable ambition. The terror of the sodomy charge forged his legendary caution and his obsessive secrecy. His crippling perfectionism led to both his most humiliating failures and his most profound discoveries. His cold, clinical detachment from the dead allowed him to see the living body in a way no one had before, and his complicated, passionate, hidden emotional life infused his art with that enigmatic, androgynous, and unsettling beauty that continues to mesmerize and mystify us 5 centuries later. Leonardo da Vinci would not want us to know about the public accusation, the abandoned masterpieces, the messy emotional reality of Salai, or the gruesome, stinking nights he spent with corpses. He, like any of us, would want his legacy to be the polished highlight reel. But that's not the real human story. The real story is infinitely more compelling. It is the story of a man, not a god. A man who walked a tightrope his entire life, balancing on the knife's edge between discovery and damnation, success and failure, sublime beauty and profound darkness. To understand this struggle, this immense, complicated, messy humanity doesn't diminish his genius in the slightest. It makes it real. It makes it breathe. It makes it all the more triumphant, because it shows us that behind the most transcendent works of art can lie the most vulnerable and unsettling of human hearts. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows. If you want to continue challenging the myths and exploring the hidden truths of art and history, please make sure you are subscribed to the Cogitart channel. Browse our library of other videos where we peel back the layers on other great artists and keep this fascinating conversation going in the comments below. We read every single one. Until next time, keep looking closer.